Hey, this is Rene Steelman. Thanks for joining me today on She Became Visible. You're going to love today's show. If any of you caught the Hulu special, Devil in the Family, or are looking forward to the Dateline special this coming Friday, you're going to want to listen to this. Megan Conor is my host, and she's got a lot of great information. Let's get going. Hello, welcome to She Became Visible. I am Rene Steelman, your host, and I am extremely excited, as I am every week. This YouTube podcast is going to be extraordinary because I have today on my show as my guest, Megan Conor. And I'm going to do a little introduction for you who Megan is. And the topic that we are going to talk about today is Mormon Killer Moms. Yeah. Did I get you? Is that clickbait enough? I mean, it's not meant to be because we're talking about Mormon killer moms today. But let me introduce Megan to you and give you a little heads up for how absolutely phenomenal she is. All right. So let's do a little intro.
I am with Megan Conor. Megan is someone really important when it comes to the Lori Vallow Daybell case and trial happening right now in Boise, Idaho. She is the first relative that's not Lori's immediate family to come forward to share her experience growing up with Lori Vallow. Megan is Lori Vallow's cousin, and we are so glad to have you here with us.
So that's just a little introduction. She is Lori Vallow Daybell's first cousin. This isn't just a cousin twice removed or a cousin that lived in Connecticut and you lived in Utah or whatever. This is a cousin that spent a lot of time, same age, kids the same age. They spent a lot of time together. Her father and Lori's mother are brother and sister. It was a close relationship, and she has been so vocal on Lori's trial and on the family dynamics. And so that's one part of today's discussion, but we're going to bring in the other Mormon killer mom to talk about as well. So let me stop talking and let me bring Megan, on. Sorry, Megan.
That's okay. It happens all the time. It's not a big deal. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh my gosh, I'm so grateful. And I have to tell you, if you Google Megan Conor, Megan, you get this fabulous singer. And I'm thinking, well, you go, girl. I didn't know you were a singer.
I actually am a singer, but not that Megan Conor.
not with the frilly little dress and the whole.
No.
I'm interested in that because you made a comment in one of your podcasts recently about being involved in a choir and having a lot of musical callings in the LDS church. And I thought, ooh, you sneaky devil, you're not telling your whole story. I want to hear more about that. So I introduced you, you're Lori Vallow's cousin, close relationship, a lot of experience with this family. But I want to go back because you are also Megan Conor. It doesn't say, when you receive your mail, it doesn't say Megan Conor, cousin of Lori Vallow,
Right.
It doesn't say that. So you are an actual person with your own life and your own experience. And I think what you've done, again, ties into my mission statement with my podcast, which is women who come to the realization of their value, their worth, their talents, and they really finally get to an age where they feel comfortable standing up and saying, I'm sorry, I'm worth something, and I have a life to live. And you have done that, and you've done it extraordinarily well. So just for a brief moment, I know you've probably done this on other podcasts, but introduce yourself a little bit because you're also a life coach, correct? Is that
Yes.
Okay. And you have a lot of clients that you are helping because of your past experience. And we're going to talk about that towards the end of this podcast. But that's something else that when we met and we talked, and you told me about the demographics of people that you heal with your life coaching, I was like, what? Are you kidding me? So anyway, so tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
I actually am a musician. That was the majority of my life, actually. I went to college and got a bachelor's degree in music and marketing. And then I went on to get a master's degree in vocal performance. And I sang professionally for several years before becoming a voice teacher and then a choir teacher in the public school system. And that is where I did the majority of my career until 2020. The pandemic hit. I think everything changed for a lot of people. But but especially for those of us who were singers, it was no fun at the time. And so I jumped into another profession. In the midst of all that was when Lori's case was unfolding. And it was really a difficult time for me and for my family, having to navigate all of the complexities of not only the case, but losing family members and then dealing with the legal, the trials afterwards and everything. And so I didn't really start speaking publicly about my childhood experiences until right around the same time, around 2019. And I was writing a book about my healing journey, healing from trauma and childhood sexual abuse. And that book was actually published just a couple years later in the midst, again, of all of this activity going on in the other part of the family with Lori and with Chad. And when Lori was on trial and she was, the media attention ramped back up again, everybody out there in the media was saying what a great mom she was. She was the cupcake mom. She was the primary chorister. She was a cheerleader. Everybody loved her. She was beautiful, charismatic. And while all of those things were true, there was also another side to her that I knew from growing up with her and spending time with her. And nobody was really talking about that angle. They were mostly saying that she was this great person until she met Chad and then snap, and she went off the deep end. And that was not my experience with her. And that's the reason I started talking publicly about who she really was when I knew her growing up, and the fact that this version of her was just an extension of her existing personality.
Oh my gosh. That correlates so well with the persona that Ruby Franke had as well. And
Yes.
which is one of my biggest gripes. And I know I have more of a cynical personality, and I have a more of a credulous type personality. I question and I'm skeptical, and I don't take things on face value as well. So many times I will hear people say, "Oh my gosh, this new family just moved into the ward. They are so nice." And I'm like, how do you know? He could be beating the crap out of his family. But what, they showed up in Gap matching clothing with a big bow in the daughter's hair, and therefore they must be great. I mean, I don't know anything outside of the bubble that I lived in for 50 something years. So I can't say what the rest of the world is like. But from my acquaintances now with the evangelical world, it seems to fall in that same pattern of judging people by their show that they put off when they appear in public places. Would you say there's a lot of dysfunction in Lori's family? You mentioned your experience, and I know you've talked a lot about narcissism. Does that seem to be something that runs in that family? Mother, father, brothers, sisters?
Before we even talk about my opinions about that,
Yeah.
let's just take a look at the facts. Okay. From this family, we have 2 serial killers.
Oh,
You don't
Alex.
get to that from having a normal upbringing. You don't get to that from having a basically good family where a few things went wrong. And I think that's where a lot of people start to get into this debate about whether it was nature or nurture, whether it was, the environment or some external force. Let's just isolate that family for a second and look at it. Out of the 5 children that were living, 3 of them have now been deceased. And 2 of those, one is deceased after becoming a serial killer. The other one is serving 3 consecutive life sentences in prison and is on trial for another murder. So you don't get to that from having a basically good upbringing. And then if we want to just be specific about it, we can talk about the fact that, I've talked about this before, about the effect of generational trauma on family systems. And then, the effect of different types of attachment styles and different types of parenting styles. So we can talk, we can sort of speculate about what we think might have gone on in the Cox household. But what we do know is that you have a high control religion married with a high control family system. And when you have those 2 things together, everybody in the family sort of learns to play a certain role. And when you've got a really controlling person managing the family system, everybody's world sort of revolves around that controlling person. And you learn to assume a role within that system in order to get your needs met. And there's nothing wrong with getting your needs met. We all are born with psychological, emotional, physical needs. When you're a child, the only worldview that you have is the one that's given to you by your family, by your parents. And you form an opinion about yourself based on what your parents say to you and what they say about you, the way that they treat you, the way that they talk to you. And when you are in a family system that's healthy and safe, and your parents talk to you positively and they encourage you and support you, you're going to grow up with a healthy attachment style. You're going to grow up with a healthy self relation. You're going to love yourself because your parents loved you and nurtured you. Absent that, it's going to get to greater levels of dysfunction depending on what was absent and what was present. So if there's an emotional neglect there, you're going to have unmet emotional needs, and you're going to try to get them met in dysfunctional ways if it hasn't been modeled to you how to meet those needs in a healthy way. Knowing Barry Cox as I do, the ruler of that family system, very controlling, very self-centered, unwilling to accept responsibility for his own actions. He was involved in suing the federal government, saying that the IRS was an illegal organization, that they shouldn't have to pay taxes. And then he served time in prison for tax evasion. So that's the example that Lori has of the framework around which she sees the justice system.
Right.
And so there's this feeling of being above the law. There's a feeling of, superiority. I think I'm special. The rules don't really apply to me. And so that's definitely going to be in the mindset of all of those kids to a certain degree. But we're certainly seeing that play out with Lori right now. And I think when people ask me, how did we get here? The answer comes back to a lot of that family system being ingrained in the child. And I saw actually a psychologist talking about this on a podcast this morning, where she said, when someone consistently experiences either emotional neglect as a childhood system or emotional abuse or a combination of those two things, it's almost like the child is marinating in trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And when you marinate something, you want the flavors to get all the way through to the very center. And that's exactly what happens when you grow up in a family system where you're emotionally neglected or emotionally abused or raised by a person with narcissistic traits who can't connect with you on an emotional level or have empathy for you.
I'm glad you brought up her father, because I do remember throughout the trial or somewhere on a podcast in the last 2 years that coming up, that he had served some jail time and tax evasion and whatnot. It seemed to be something that was like, and then people moved on. I know they concentrated a lot on her relationship with Alex, the two of them together, but there wasn't a lot of pulling that whole family together and saying, and I know you mentioned 3 out of the 5, the one sister died of cancer though, right? She wasn't.
It wasn't cancer. She was a type 1 diabetic.
Oh, there you go.
And she had had chronic health problems throughout her young adulthood and the later, I say the later years of her life, but she was only 32 when she died. I wasn't there when she actually passed away, but if you haven't heard the story of how Alex and I came to find her in a diabetic coma, he and I were the only ones who were there. The rest of the family was in Hawaii. And I can relate that story if you like. It's very heavy, it's very dark, but I think it's an important story to understand the family dynamic and the relationship.
Yeah, go ahead and tell that.
So this was 1998. The Cox family was living in San Antonio. Lori was living in Austin for the most part, but she was back and forth between Austin and San Antonio. And Colby, her oldest son, was staying with Barry quite a lot while she was working. Alex and I were Alex was living in San Antonio. He lived with his parents for a little while, but then he also had his own place for a little while as well. And Stacy was living with Janice and Barry at the time. And, our families were close. We spent holidays and birthdays and family events together quite often during the time that they lived in San Antonio. And so Alex and I, every once in a while, would hang out and watch a movie or get dinner together or something. It had been several weeks, if not more than a month, since I'd heard from him, but he called me kind of out of the blue and wanted to get together that night, which was a little bit odd, but not totally unusual. So he brought over some takeout and we watched a movie. And about halfway through the movie, he stopped and told me that he'd been really worried about Stacy, that he was worried that she had not been in a good place mentally, and that he was really concerned for her and wanted to know if I would go with him to Janice and Barry's house to check on her and see if she was okay. So all of that was very weird. And of course, knowing what I know now, hindsight being 2020, all kinds of alarm bells and red flags would have gone off. But at this time, I was only 23 years old. I was still very much in the family ether, meaning like I was under the spell of believing that everybody in my family was basically good and decent, that my upbringing was basically normal, and that the ways that our families related with each other was normal. And obviously it wasn't, but it took me many, many years to figure that out. So I basically just wanted to believe that everyone's motives were good and kind. So anyway, I went with Alex to Janice and Barry's house. The house was completely dark. Stacy was upstairs in Janice and Barry's room instead of in the room that she normally slept in downstairs. And when we found her, she was unresponsive. And Alex called 911. The paramedics came. They took her to the hospital. And my parents met us there. And we later learned that she was in a diabetic coma, or they call it DKA, sometimes diabetic ketoacidosis. And it's basically where your blood sugar level gets so high that your body starts to catabolize or consume your organs. And so the doctors told us that she'd been in this state long enough that she was not going to recover. We needed to move her to hospice care. And so my parents were the ones who helped arrange for that care. My dad contacted Janice, and so Janice, Barry, Lori, Summer, and Colby were all in Hawaii on a vacation at this time. And despite my dad contacting them and telling them that Stacy was not going to recover, they did not come home from Hawaii right away. We knew that she didn't have very many days left. We didn't know exactly how many, but it took them several days before they finally decided to come home. And by the time they got home, she had already passed away. So luckily, we were able to get in touch with her former husband, Steve, and he brought their daughter, Melanie, to the hospice care, and she was able to say goodbye. Melanie was able to say goodbye to her mother, and Stacy died shortly after that.
It's unbelievable. That is so telling in so many different ways. That is amazing. Did they ever wonder if there was any kind of interference with causing the diabetic coma or the cause of the death?
The death. Yeah. So the immediate conclusion that some of the family members jumped to, or maybe had already in their mind to feed people, was that Stacy had done something to harm herself. Alex planted that thought in my mind. He said, Stacy told me she was just going to take a big shot and go to bed, and I'm really worried about her. Well, I have a type 1 diabetic son now, and at the time I didn't. I had no idea how blood sugar worked and insulin worked and all of that, or how you care for that condition. So now I know that if you take a big shot, that the insulin is going to lower your blood sugar level. And that's another dangerous condition, but it's the opposite of diabetic ketoacidosis. It's low blood sugar, which you can also die from. But the high blood sugar is a completely different situation. DKA is very clearly on the opposite side of that. So if Stacy had in fact taken a big shot and gone to bed, it would have been the opposite effect. But I feel like Alex told me that as a sort of a setup to, this is why we might find her not okay. He definitely had access to her diabetic supplies. It wouldn't have been hard for him to put something in a vial. I'm making speculations here, but I don't think it's outside of the realm of possibility. And some of my family members balk when I give this sort of speculation about what might have happened, or that he might have hastened her death, or that the parents might have been involved. They had told her many times that maybe you're just not meant to have a long life. Maybe it's your time to go. This is documented in her divorce documents with her husband, Steve, who is the one who said that he witnessed Barry telling her these things. And so I'm not going a bridge too far, I don't think.
Right.
And also, I just want to point out once again, I was the only family member who was there with Alex. And then Alex's behavior following that was extremely odd. My parents and I were arranging the hospice care. We were there with Stacy for at least a day and a half before I saw Alex again. And when I saw him again, he told me that he had been out shopping, and he had taken Stacy's credit card and gone out and bought things like golf clubs and a comforter for his apartment and things like that. So obviously extremely odd behavior. And when I asked him about it, he said, well, I don't think she's going to mind. So obviously very callous, very cold, and definitely tells you what kind of a mindset Alex has around the death of his own sister.
Right. That is so telling. And not only that, but it also plays into the father's mentality as far as the next life, the purpose of this life, how valuable is this life compared to what the next life is going to be like. So that had to play into the whole family thought process as well. So it's
for sure. When you have a belief in an afterlife that's going to be so much, exponentially bigger, better than this life, right?
Right.
There are so many people who then subjugate the value of this life.
Right.
diminish the value of this life and say, well, everything's going to be better in the next life. So it doesn't really matter if I die young, I'm still going to a great place.
Yeah.
And so that sort of mentality, it's problematic to me for a number of different reasons.
Right.
Of course, throwing away the value of something you have for something that you might get in the future is
Right.
certainly something in my mind, but also just the idea that death becomes not as consequential
Yeah.
in that way, and therefore life becomes less valuable just by definition.
That is a great segue, Megan, for the comparison between that mentality and the Ruby Franke idea that the religion, you can't separate that. You can't separate the teachings of this religion with the behavior. You can speculate about what their life would have been like if they would have been, agnostic and the whole family would have just been raised in a secular, fun, whatever. You can't know that because exactly what you said. It was one of the things that I mentioned in one of my other things. Michelle Stone's been on quite a few podcasts, and she swears that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints had nothing to do with her choosing to have 13 children. That was her choice because she loves children and she loves being a mom. It doesn't matter that her mom had 9 children or whatever. The church teaches you that had nothing to do with it. And it's like, no, you can't, like, as you mentioned, you cannot marinate or swim in this water and then go and go, what water? I didn't know there was water in this fishbowl. The idea that Ruby and Lori were freaks. They were anomalies. They were rare. This doesn't happen. But every one of us have sat in a congregational meeting or been involved in the women's organization in the Mormon church. And we know that they may not be killing their children yet, but there's abuse and there's this mentality, the mentality of their worth, their purpose here on earth, what the purpose of it is and the value of it, and what they do and how that will play into their eternal salvation, which turns people into freaks. And everybody just laughs. Oh, that's sister so-and-so. She's a little kooky. Or, oh, that sister so-and-so. I don't know why her kids are all sick all the time. Munchausen? I've never heard of that. It couldn't be that. She's the Relief Society secretary. How could she have Munchausen's? That kind of thing. Because she died, Alex died, and then you've got these, like you were saying earlier, there's only so much law enforcement can do. And at some point, you just have to deal with what's happening. So, but it would have been interesting if Alex wouldn't have died. Because I know at one point someone was even bringing out Lori's first husband and his death, which was, I think, put as a cardiac.
So it's actually actually her third husband.
There you go. It was
Yeah.
the third husband. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, as far as we know, her first 2 husbands are still living, or at least they were when Lori went into prison. So as far as we know,
Yeah.
but yes, her third husband also died under suspicious circumstances right around the same time frame, 2018. So prior to Charles, obviously.
Yeah.
But again, suspicious circumstances. We know that Alex had a history of violence
Yeah.
against Lori's romantic partners, constantly saying, I'm going to beat that guy up. I'm going to, attack that guy. And I think when Lori accused her third husband of harming her children, Alex went into protector mode and he actually assaulted Joe Ryan with a taser. And he ended up doing jail time for that.
Right.
And so, when you're talking about law enforcement, of course, we do the best that we can with what we have. I just wonder if they looked at his criminal record when they brought him in for questioning, and if they asked him about that assault.
Right.
And if they had any sort of a connection of, hey, there's a pattern here, I can't armchair quarterback too much.
Yeah. Right.
And I don't know what it's like to be a law enforcement officer and to be
Right.
questioning someone where they're claiming self-defense. However, the circumstances are suspicious. You've got someone with a criminal record. At the very least, ask him about the record. Ask him, so who was Joe Ryan? Oh, it turns out he was one of Lori's husbands too. Okay, now we've got a pattern.
Yes.
And can we at least hold him for 24 hours while we discuss the possibility of that pattern repeating itself?
That there is nothing worse than being the armchair quarterback and
Right.
all the looking back, and there's nothing worse than that. And people thinking that they know how they would have done it if they would have,
Right.
been there, or how they would have, handled that such situation. When I look at the body cams of the police and how they handled Charles Vallow, and then also in the Gilbert area, where I think it was in Gilbert or Chandler, was Charles in Gilbert at the time when he was?
Yeah, well, it was Chandler, I believe, and they're impossibly close to each other.
Yeah,
It's
like
all
driving down the
parts of the
street.
same, like, Phoenix is this huge
Exactly.
area, and they're
Yeah.
just right next to each other, so I don't remember which is which. I think they were living in Chandler, or I think they were living in Gilbert, and I think Brandon Boudreaux was in Chandler,
Yeah, I
if
think
that's
you're
where you're
right.
going.
There's a thing going on right now, and it's kind of faded away in the news, but there was a group of young kids, and they called them the Gilbert Goons. And there was
Mm,
actually a young boy that was murdered on Halloween night after a Halloween party.
I remember this,
Yeah,
yeah.
and so people had videos and they knew who they were, but it took years before the Gilbert police took this seriously. And
Mm.
finally, one of the boys, I believe, is finally going to prison, but police officers it's just very complicated. So you can't help but kind of go, what's going on in Gilbert? It's why
Yeah,
aren't police taking these people seriously when they complain?
yeah.
But it is, and it's also interesting as I watch a lot of, I don't watch, okay, I guess you would consider it true crime, but I do watch a lot of Datelines and 48 Hours and that kind of stuff. But it is interesting to me what was the one that just happened on New Year's Eve, where they found the body in the trunk, and the lady is LDS. This was out in Utah. She had gotten custody of her children. Her ex-husband was wacky, and she had done all the, CPS had finally let her have the children, but they were at one time saying, no, 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 you have to let your husband have the child. Anyway, it wasn't until they found a freaking dead body in his trunk before they went, okay, you know what? He might be a little off. There might be something here. And now he's finally
I
going to,
didn't hear about that one, and that's super
yeah.
disturbing, but it's unfortunately unsurprising that we continue to see a pattern of this type of behavior,
Yeah.
because high demand religion is especially dangerous for people with personality disorders, because they're going to take that religion to the next level. And when I say next level, this is what I'm talking about. It's Ruby Franke, high control over her family and her children.
Yeah.
It's, Lori Vallow taking the idea of the second coming and the idea of evil spirits that we read about in the Bible and taking it to the next level and putting their own spin on it. And then also believing that they're special and believing that they have special powers. And when
Yes.
you've got a religion that's founded on the idea that you can get revelation from God, that you can speak directly to God,
Yeah.
it can be really problematic for people with personality disorders. And I would
Exactly.
argue as well that, a church that's high control creates parents who are high control, because they learn from the church how the church deals with their members, and they treat their children that way. And it gets passed on from generation to generation.
Right. And also a lot of the things that have happened in the last month. I mean, Jen Nelson, she does all those opposed TikTok. And we were
Mhm.
talking about how you so desperately want to leave the church, leave it alone, walk away, enjoy your beautiful new life that you've discovered, as you said in your the name of your YouTube, which is Midlife Revolution. That you don't want to call it a crisis. I didn't have a faith crisis. I had a faith
Yeah.
awareness. I was like, "Oh, what?" I didn't consider it a crisis. I was like, "Well, I'm out of here,"
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an awakening. So I never felt the grief that a lot of people have felt, because my family dynamics were completely different and I don't live in Utah. So I don't
Yeah.
have to, walk out my door and see the entire ward on my street, just lots
Right.
of things like that. But the idea that you think you can walk away, and then every single day they just had another sexual abuse thing put in, where they met at a young single adult. They went and talked to the bishop, and the bishop said, he's a good guy. He's repented. He's trying really hard. You just support him. If you could just love him more. And so this is what you're constantly hearing. And so you're kind of like, we have a problem in this system, in this institution. There is a huge problem. And it goes back to that. It's, first of all, the patriarchy. So you have power and power of God. You have revelation. You have this line upon line stuff where they can change policies and doctrine and then just say, oh, line upon line. that was scripture number, whatever, out of the Doctrine and Covenants. Joseph Smith said things are going to change because new things come in all the time. It's
Yep.
like a breaking news in the bedroom of Russell Nelson. But you're absolutely right. I wanted to show, so you and I both were kind of like, they're just now starting to advertise that on Friday, there's going to be a Dateline with Keith Morrison, who I love Keith Morrison. And it's going to be with Lori Vallow, or Lori Daybell. I guess she's finally gotten the Vallow part taken out of her name or whatever. I'm always amazed when I get outside of the bubble and I'll say, like, I was with a hiking group in Zion last year, and I mentioned Ruby Franke and Tim Ballard. These women were from the East Coast. They're not members of the church, and they're not former members of the church. And they were like, who is that? No, I've never heard of them. So you've never heard of Ruby Franke? Because we're so ingrained in this system and all the crazies that are going on, we think everybody, well, Dateline, Keith Morrison, I think there's going to be a little bit more about it. And obviously the trial brought it into the world a little bit more than just the bubble. Let's watch a little clip of what's happening this Friday.
Is on Friday with an all-new 2-hour episode, and it is a blockbuster. The first ever television interview with the convicted killer known as Mommy Doomsday. Lori Vallow is doing life without parole for, among other crimes, the murders of her 2 children in Idaho. She's now at Maricopa County Estrella Jail awaiting another murder trial. Keith Morrison has been on this case since it got worldwide attention more than 5 years ago.
Chad was convicted and he's on death row now.
I understand that, yeah.
But
they have some fascinating stories.
How could you possibly think that Chad would be exonerated after what happened?
The same way I will be exonerated. We will both be exonerated in the future.
Because?
I have seen things in the future that Jesus showed me when I was in heaven. And we were not in jail. And we were not in prison. And they were still in the future from now.
Okay. All righty then. It's going to be exciting. Getting my popcorn. I think we should have a watch party, Megan. It's going to be fascinating. The biggest thing for me, because my former life, I was an interior designer, so visuals are very important to me. So I just remember when Ruby was brought into court for her to get her sentencing, and I'm like, dang, that girl's got great hair. Her hair, whether it was short or long, she really knew how to do her hair, And then a lot of people have commented that on Lori. They're like, what is happening? And if nothing else, Megan, what this has taught me watching both Ruby and Lori is that you make it part of your plea agreement that you will get Botox while you're in jail, because it is devastating to see what happens when you have to give up your Botox. Anyway, so
yeah, just don't start. That's my advice. Just don't start. Then you don't have to worry about it.
That's probably true. That's probably true. But it's just fascinating to see these women. But the similarities are frightening. And I know that on one of the podcasts you were on, someone mentioned Ruby Franke's fan, because everybody has, the one kid that just got called into the principal's office every freaking day. The one kid, they're like, yeah, that's my sister. I know she's, everybody has that. I want to show a little clip of her family, because if you think Ruby, like Kevin says in the show that we were going to talk about, she just decided one day she was going to start doing a YouTube. No. This goes way back. So watch this.
Excuse me. The poor guy behind.
I guess we march with the sign. I think we're going to start a movement, though. I'm a little worried about it.
Grant can watch. They had signs on their house. They put up yellow ribbons. Like this family just came back from World War II. Yellow ribbons. Do they not know what that stands for?
They obviously don't.
Yeah, they had American flags and yellow ribbons and welcome home, Grandma and Grandpa, because these people came back from their mission. And it was like their 4th mission that they've done. And if you look on YouTube, you'll see her mother does a whole YouTube, which has thousands of views on how they chose the names of their children. And we decided to name Ruby because, and then, my love.
That's her parents? Her parents have a YouTube?
Those are her parents. Those are Ruby Franke's parents and sisters in that.
Okay.
The editing, the quality, the prep, it's like freaking CBS News was there to cover the return. And if you've ever been to the Salt Lake City airport, this is what you will see every time you walk through the gate. Families standing with the life-size cardboard cutouts of the person returning, little face signs, the big sign, welcome home, sister so-and-so from Nigeria. They always have to put where they went. This is what you see in Salt Lake because this is the keeping up with the Joneses, perfection gospel, prosperity gospel. I'm just as good as you are. Look, we pay our tithing and we're so blessed that we can go on 4 missions because we're so rich, because we pay our tithing. I mean, the whole prosperity gospel obedience, but this is her family. And her sisters also had YouTube channels. Her sisters were also showing almost abusive behavior towards training their children. So this wasn't just something that Ruby decided to do one day.
So I just finished a 6-hour episode on Mormon Stories podcast on Monday.
Did you take
about
a lunch? Yeah.
Yeah, we did not take a lunch. We snuck out when we had to use the bathroom. It was a very long unpack of the documentary that was just released on Hulu of the Ruby Franke Jodi Hildebrand case. And we do draw a lot of parallels between Lori and Ruby. Lauren Matthias from Hidden True Crime made the parallel that Jodi is to Chad Daybell as Ruby is to Lori, and that it was that combination of those dynamics coming together.
I think they're comparing the obedience and parents demanded obedience. Therefore, their children demanded obedience. And we're going to put it out on video because their leaders speak at conference or at a fireside or some kind of BYU event. And they hear the leaders of the church say, basically, I feel like this is my own opinion, but I feel like Russell Nelson has turned God's love into conciliatory. It's like, okay, well, what are you doing for me? I mean, it's a transaction. I'll do for you, but what are you doing for me? Are you obeying me enough? We'll see. So obedience is truly being taught. And the more obedient you are, the more blessed you will be. And therefore, let me show the world how blessed I am. And there's also something when you compare the two with this truth thing.
Truth and distortion.
Yeah.
The thing that is scary to me is that Jodi Hildebrand had such a huge influence over the therapy community in Utah.
Yes.
And when you hear someone speak authoritatively about their profession, about their opinions, about their worldview, there is something in our brain that gives more credence to those words, even if they're words we haven't heard before, words like distortion, using the word truth in a different context than usual. And when you hear it enough, it starts to sort of sink in a little bit. And that's what I think is dangerous. I have unfortunately seen and heard other therapists in the Utah therapy community, therapists who are perfectly healthy, wonderful people. I see snippets of these ideas creeping into their speech and into their practice, and it's incredibly dangerous. So that's why I think it's super important to continue to call attention to the ideas that Jodi and Ruby were putting out there. Now, I said this on Monday on the podcast, unfortunately, Jodi and Ruby's podcasts, the Moms of Truth podcasts, the Connections Classroom podcast, they're still available on Spotify. You can go there right now today and still download those podcasts. So what my concern is that somebody is going to unintentionally stumble across these thinking that this is good parenting advice or good therapy advice, and they're going to start adopting truth and distortion into their own way of thinking. The ideas are dangerous. If we don't continue to talk about the ideas and why they're dangerous, other people are going to come up with their own little versions of them, and we're going to see more of the same, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's so true, especially in these last days, which are really being, taunted a lot now too, that, these are the last days, you better tighten it up. You better start really, living your covenant path. And so there's more obedience. And I just watched a fabulous thing, and I can't remember any of the things on it. It was on stupidity and the German philosopher that came up with the stupidity. And the stupidity is what authoritarian systems want, because if you don't question and you don't use any kind of critical thinking, then I can control you, basically is what it said. And that's
And
what
an important thing to talk about too, because if you have a people who don't question or who don't think critically, then they're easy to control. And so let's talk about a couple of the things that contribute to stupidity. One of them is black and white thinking. And that's where we are so much with politics and religion and economics these days, is that there are two ways that are being presented, and one of them is right and the other one is wrong. Guys, embrace the gray area. There is gray area everywhere. And the second idea is not questioning things, just taking the word of someone who you generally trust as the gospel truth and believing everything they say. And it's like picking whatever political candidate that you want to pick, believing everything they say and discounting everything the other side says.
Right.
This tribalism and this idea that my side is right and I'm going to believe everything my leader says and never think about anything the other person says. And the other part of it is having these quick and easy labels for things and being able to say, othering people and the tribalism that I referred to before. It's like, if I can label this person as a political party that I don't like, then I don't have to listen to any of their ideas. And if I label this group of people over here as something that's kooky and harmful, then I'm never going to talk to or listen to any of their ideas. And the harmful thing about that is that when we other each other, instead of looking at each other's humanity, we start to dehumanize each other.
Yeah.
And that's when it becomes possible for us to do really horrific things to each other, when we dehumanize people.
That's so important. You're absolutely right. So that kind of leads me into your job as a life coach. I joined a group that I wanted to I was really curious. I joined this group and they were going to do a weekly group therapy, I guess. I only listened to like 2 weeks and I was like, I can't do this because it's not my personality. But what I heard were women my age. They've raised their children. They've supported their husbands. They've given up schooling. They've given up careers. They learned to cook and quilt, and they're very proud of that. But they had dreams. And so they're in this therapy thing now because they're not happy and they don't know why. This one lady said, for example, I've lost 100 pounds. And I'm so proud of myself. I just want to go to a yoga class. I'd really like to go to a yoga class, but I don't know. And the therapist was like, you don't know what? You don't know that you can go down the street and join a yoga class? Why don't you go to a yoga class? And I was like, because I was screaming at my computer, why don't you go to a yoga class? What's stopping you from going to a yoga class? And I see this and I know that when you're talking to someone who has that obedient mentality and they get those warm, fuzzy feelings when they do what they're told to do, which verifies to them that they are following the laws and they're on the covenant path. But I see these women, just like Ruby Franke's mother, who's just gotten back from a 4th mission, all these grandkids. It's like, how do you even know your grandkids? You haven't been there in, 4 times, 18 years. You've been off on these missions with your husband. And I see these women because that's the program. You're a mother, then you're a grandmother, then stop being a grandmother. Now you're going to support your husband in his callings while you were a mother, but now you're going to go on missions. You're going to spend the rest of your life until you're dead going on missions for the church, leaving your family. The women just go, okay, I'll leave my home, my beautiful home that I've spent 35 years. It's finally empty. We're finally empty nesters. We finally have our own time. But no, I'll go. And I love it. It's so great. Wonderful people. I met the nicest people in Russia. They were so kind and good. We're serving the Lord. It's good. You don't hear that. You're hearing the crying. You're hearing but I just thought maybe I could take a acting class or a art class, or I just thought maybe I could go back to my maybe work on my master's degree. But what do you hear?
What I hear is women who don't value themselves enough and don't invest enough in their relationship with themselves. And I sort of hate the life coach moniker because it has kind of a negative connotation in some circles. And it's not really a good label or an indicator of what I actually do with people. What I actually do with people is I listen to their stories and I listen to the hopes and dreams that they have for their lives. And I encourage them to go and fulfill those goals and dreams. What I'm hopeful is that the experiences that I've been through and the lessons that I've learned can help to spark their imagination about how to solve problems creatively in their own lives. Because speaking from my own experience, when I was in survival mode, I spent so much energy just trying to get through every single day and trying to keep my head above water, that I didn't have the brain space to solve problems creatively. All I could do was think about what I'd always done and continue to do it that way, because I was just barely surviving, right? And so my job is to sort of zoom out a little bit and to be able to look at someone's life from the outside and listen to their stories and see where they might be repeating unhealthy cycles and patterns in their life, and sort of maybe guide them into a different direction by sharing my experiences of how I did that. So my life has been a series of learning how to break unhealthy patterns and break unhealthy cycles, and learning how to make the choice that is the most loving thing for myself, rather than putting everyone else in front of me all the time. And that's kind of what I was raised in, in the church, to believe that everyone else is more important than me. And in the stories that you're telling, Rene, where you're talking about these women who don't know if they should go to a yoga class, what I see in that is someone who doesn't really know exactly what they want, because they've never stopped to consider it, because all that they've been handed, the value of their life, they've been told that their only value is that of wife and mother, and then continuing to support the church callings. And continuing to support the husband in the church callings, as theirs is really secondary. It's like mission president and his wife. It's temple president and his wife. I kind of want to write a book called "And His Wife," because that's the role that we got handed. And what we have to realize is that we're an individual human being with hopes and dreams, and with skills, and with goals, and with things that we can contribute beyond just supporting what a man is doing. We are valuable intrinsically. And if we want to invest in ourselves, we should. In fact, I'm just going to say, there is no if about it. We should want to invest in ourselves by taking that yoga class, by working with a mentor, by going out and lifting weights, by going out and doing the things that we were told as little girls we couldn't do or shouldn't do, because it wasn't in furtherance of that goal of wife and mother. And the thing that I learned, the most important lesson that I learned, is I was so scared to get divorced, because my biggest fear was that I wouldn't be able to provide for my children on my own. That was the only reason, basically, that I stayed in my marriage as long as I did. Of course, I was worried about the emotional impact on my kids, but if I couldn't provide for their physical needs, then we were really in trouble, right? But what I learned is that when I got divorced and my life energy was no longer being sucked up by this toxic relationship, I was free to care for my children better. I then took that energy that was being sucked away in that primary relationship, and I gave it to my children, and I gave it to myself. I think we as women, we get put into these roles, and we aren't allowed the space to consider what we want, who we are as individuals. And we are told and conditioned to believe that it's wrong for us to spend money on ourselves, to spend time on ourselves. And then we end up less of a woman, because we're less able to be a good wife and a good mother, if that's what we've chosen to do. We're less able to be a good employee. We're less able to be a decent human being, a good citizen, a contributor to the world that we live in, when we give all of our energy to other people rather than taking care of ourselves first. And it's such a classic, ridiculous trope, but we don't think of it often enough. Put your own oxygen mask on first. Meet your own needs. Breathe your own air first. And then you can help someone else.
You're so right. But they highlighted the fact that a woman, same scenario, large family, raised the kids, blah, 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 found a group of other women and started hanging out with these other women. They started traveling together. They started going to book clubs, things together, and little museum trips. And the son wrote in and said, the worst thing that could have ever happened to my mother is finding these women. She's not there to babysit for her grandkids anymore. She's not available when we want her. Sometimes she misses things. And what kind of a grandmother is that goes off and does her own thing with her girlfriends? He looked at that as a selfish thing. And I just remember going, there it is. There it is right there. And that's been taught, that's been indoctrinated. And so the women are, you would never say that. You would never. I mean, I always tell my husband, I said, I want to point this out to you. You just planned a hunting trip with your sons. No problem. Got the dates on. I said, I've been trying to get a girls' trip with my daughters for the last 4 years. But guess what I hear? I don't know. So-and-so's got therapy. So-and-so's in a soccer match. That's homecoming. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that because they're mothers and they have families that they have to take care of. And the idea that they can just walk out the door on a certain date in August, they can't even plan 4 months in advance because, when you've got kids, I remember my brother used to work for Franklin Covey when the Franklin Covey planner first came out. And it was like, we're going to make a list of things we're going to do today. We're going to prioritize A, and then we've got the B list. And I remember going, oh, yes. See, you're a man and you don't have children because you take that list, you write it out, and then you rip it up and you throw it away because the school's going to call and tell you that your kid's sick. You got to come and pick them up or whatever, things that happen when you're mothers. And so the whole idea that we are living constantly spontaneously is just the reality, of our lives. And I guess that then becomes the pathway, like you said, right? So now their kids are grown and gone, but the women, that's their pathway. So they're like, well, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I could sign up for a yoga class, but what if my husband needs me? Or what if one of the kids calls? And then the thought, do they go, I can't say that. I can't do that. What do they say to you when you say that?
I'm always an advocate of prioritizing myself early in the day because then no matter what goes awry, I still have already done my thing for myself. Probably for about a good 3 years, I was up at 5 o'clock every morning going to the gym to lift weights because I knew that was going to energize me for the rest of the day, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I would come home, make myself a nice breakfast, do my journaling and make my list for the day before the kids ever got up.
Yeah.
And I know that a lot of women, there was definitely a time in my life when I had lots of young kids at home, when I was waking up 5 or 10 minutes before I absolutely had to because I was freaking exhausted, right? So it's not practical for everyone to do that every single day. So I'm not suggesting just get up an hour earlier because that was the advice I was given at one point. Well, just get up earlier. I'm like, okay, I've gone to bed at 11 o'clock and I'm already getting up at 5. I can't just get up an hour. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is prioritize what's important to you, what you know that you need in order to be filled with energy before you have to take care of someone else. So if that looks like Sunday night before the week starts, setting aside some time just for you, or whether it looks like Monday afternoon, the kids are already home, but maybe they're doing homework and you can take an hour to set aside for yourself. Whatever that looks like in your schedule, it's prioritizing that time for yourself as if it were as important as your kid's doctor appointment, because it is that important. Because if you're just running yourself crazy, doing all of the errands for your kid and husband and home, even at your job or your career, you're giving all your energy to other people. And where do you refill that bucket? Again, you can't pour from an empty cup. So you have to take the time to intentionally set aside what it is that you need for yourself. I was just under the impression for the first 35 years of my life that self-care was selfish.
Yeah.
How dare you ignore your kids and get in a bubble bath? How dare you go on a girls' weekend or a girls' trip or even to the movies with a girlfriend or by yourself and leave your kids at home to do nothing or to be with their dad or whatever? It's like, okay, let's just have some balance. My kids are my first priority, but I'm also a priority too. I have to fit in there somewhere. And I just recognize for myself, there are some things that are non-negotiables for me. I think if a lot of women would sit down and look at what are you sacrificing in favor of other people, it's going to be some pretty basic and necessary things like food, water, sleep. Those things, we don't prioritize ourselves even in that way.
Yeah.
So just to say, I need a good 7 to 8 hours of restful sleep every night, that's foundational to my mental health. And so if my kid has a science project and they've forgotten to buy the poster board and it's 10:30 at night, and I know they're going to be up for another 2 or 3 hours working on this project, all right, I'll go buy the poster board for you, but then you're on your own. Like if you would have planned ahead and prioritized your project, I could have helped you all week long. So part of it is allowing your kids and your spouse and your boss and whoever else is in your life to experience the natural consequences of their behavior. You don't have to put out every fire. You don't have to save them from every inconvenience. Although I never went as far as Ruby Franke did with saying, don't feed my child because they forgot their lunch. Well, if my child forgot their lunch, maybe they have to eat in the cafeteria that day. because
Yeah.
I can't drop everything and run to the school. Obviously, highest and best that we want for our children, but they have to contribute to that as well. And so, I live right across the street from the high school that my kids have gone to for the last 20 years, the one that I worked at for 10 years. But when my girls were in dance and cheer and they had 62 things they had to have in their backpack for the game that day, if they forgot something, I'm sorry. Do your conditioning, take your punishment from your dance teacher, and you'll remember next time. Like, I'm going to do everything I can to help you, but I'm not going to save you from yourself.
And what is it, Megan, when people with neurotypical brains listen to that and they go, yeah, I'm sorry, you have to walk to school. I'm in Portland. I can't come back and you're going to have to walk because you missed the bus, whatever. That's a natural consequence. What is it about a neurotypical person or someone that's been raised in a traumatic, abusive family that takes it to the Ruby Franke level, where you've got, how old was the daughter? The video the one that started the crash for her, where she said, well, I guess she's just going to have to be hungry. I told her, wasn't she like 5 or something?
Yeah, it was a combination between her son sleeping on a beanbag for 7 months, who was,
Yeah.
I think, 16 or 17 at the time. And then I think her daughter was at least in first grade, so maybe she was 6 or 7 at the time. But even
Yeah.
so, you're talking about an elementary school kid here, right?
Yeah.
So if your elementary school kid forgets their lunch one time, okay, they eat
Yeah.
in the cafeteria, or maybe you bring them lunch one time, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I also will say, I know someone who is an excellent father who does really, really great parenting work, who does bring his kids stuff every single time they forget it because they've had other traumatic things going on in their life. And he said, look, if I can make their lives easier in this one way, I'm going to do it. He's not doing it to the detriment of his own mental health, right?
Right.
So when the question you're asking, though, is when you have a parent who is not neurotypical or who was not raised in a healthy environment with a healthy attachment style, they've got some type of personality disorder or whatever. And so that's a harder thing, because when you have narcissistic traits and doing enough self-care, it's not that she was prioritizing what her kids wanted above what she wanted. She was consistently prioritizing what she wanted to the detriment of everyone else. That's a personality disorder, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm not talking about that sort of toxicity where you don't have the ability to understand how your actions impact other people and you can't take responsibility and you can't empathize. That's a completely different set of circumstances, obviously. But
Yeah.
if you're somebody who right now is listening to this and going, oh my gosh, do I have a personality disorder? Am I the one who is narcissistic? Am I prioritizing myself at the detriment of everyone else? Well, if you're asking yourself that question, chances are that no, you don't have a personality disorder,
Yeah.
because the people who are truly disordered don't think it's a problem.
Right. That's perfect. And you're absolutely right, because, Dr. Remy, I don't know if you've listened to her. She's a narcissist.
Romney, yeah.
Yeah, Romney.
Love
She's
her.
and I like that she said everybody has narcissistic tendencies. All right. We all have the times when it's like, it's all about me today. All right.
Yeah.
That's typical. It's when it breaks out, you've got at least five of the things on the list that you're like, and not taking responsibility, not seeing any blame or using other people for your own fame or whatever. And, but I love when you said on the podcast that you did on Monday, when I watched the special, I didn't realize that they were, I remember hearing it, but I didn't put 2 and 2 together when she's doing the thing with her colored pencils.
With the
and
pens.
Yeah. I didn't realize that was Sunday morning and that they were getting ready for church, and then Kevin yells out, well, we're trying to get ready for church. And I think that didn't click, because in 50 years of marriage, my husband has never gotten children ready for church. And so the idea that he was getting people ready for church, I didn't even hear it. And then you said, well, I had 6 kids. I dragged 6 kids to church. I said, yeah. When my husband and I got married, he'd been off his mission 3 weeks. And we got married, and we go back to Japan because that's where I was stationed. He gets put in the branch presidency. He's 22 years old. He's sitting up there with these 2 old men. He's been on the stand from the time we were married. And so I've always dragged 6 kids to church by myself. And so when you said I always took 6 kids to church by myself, how come she wasn't, and I thought, yeah, thank you, sister. That's my life, my kids are all running around and they're like, where's your husband? I'm like, I don't know. He's visiting another ward. He's at the High Council.
Yeah.
He was never there. So I think I didn't even hear that, but I'm glad you pointed out that they had all this because I kept the whole time I'm watching it, I'm thinking, where'd they get that B-roll? They find that because I remember I was primary president. I'm dragging kids to church by myself, and my husband's nowhere to be seen. And I am yelling and screaming at these kids to get dressed and get in the car and you be quiet. And then we get to church and I'm like, welcome, welcome, children. And my second son is like, oh, wow, that's amazing. That little flip you did there was just, I mean, he called me out on it at 8 years old. He's like, you hypocrite. And it's true. But I'm like, I just thought, glad nobody had a video camera in my house.
Yeah,
So,
well, we have to remember too that Ruby was voluntarily filming all of these things. And the
yes.
other part of it is that, when the very telling thing for me was when Chad did come on and said, yeah, I've been sleeping on a beanbag for 7 months. She could have cut that out. She could have
Yes.
edited that out. But this is why people with personality disorders, one of the red flags is that they don't know that what they're doing is problematic.
Yes.
Ruby thought that this tough love parenting was excellent parenting, and she was holding it up for the whole world to see. This is how you handle difficult children.
You're exactly right. And I remember you pointing that out. It's not that it happened, it's that she wasn't remorseful. She didn't see it. She didn't say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have done that. Oh, I'm just so stressed out.
Yeah,
You
or
never heard
even
that.
to say in the moment, like Chad saying it in front of everybody, and to just stop the camera for a second and say, you know what? Our viewers didn't know that. And I bet if they did, they would probably be horrified. And I'm sorry, Chad, that was wrong. I shouldn't have done that.
Yes. Oh my
Just have a little, like maybe a tiny bit of introspection, or at the point when she's telling Chad to fake being happy and he just goes despondent and he says, I don't think I can. Is there a mother on the planet who has empathy, who wouldn't stop everything and hug that child and say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
You shouldn't have to fake being happy.
I think the one that really got me was when she's sitting on the couch with Kevin. He's got his arm around her, so it's just their heads are just really close together. And she starts to talk, and then he doesn't do it right. And she's like you say, she stops, and the hate in her face was like, and
Yeah.
you could see it in his face. I mean, I have a lot of problems with him. I also have compassion and empathy because you could see it in his face where he's trying. Oh, what did you want me to say? I'm sorry. I didn't know what to say. Should we do it over again? And she's like,
Yeah.
well, just act like this or just say this. And then she turns the camera on and again, she's like, yeah.
What broke my heart in that moment was that right after that, they go to Kevin being interviewed, and he said, it wasn't enough to just interact with Ruby. It wasn't enough to just be there and have a conversation. You had to be on and you had to be performing, is essentially, I'm paraphrasing a little bit. But
Wow.
how sad that he felt as a husband that it wasn't enough for him to just be with his wife, sitting there having a conversation and engaging with her. It was that he had to perform for the camera also.
And I love that he admitted $100,000 a month is a lot of money. That was the witchcraft that took him over.
However, it's so important to point out, he was against this. He was uncomfortable. He didn't like it. He didn't enjoy it. When he did the 180 wasn't when they were making $100,000 a month. It was that first paycheck of $85. That
Oh,
was
yeah,
all
that's
it took
true.
for the flip to switch and for him to be like, oh, okay, I'm good with this now.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to play along. Now I'm going to do it. It's like, it's amazing how small of an incentive it takes for you to completely sell out something he was so uncomfortable with before. And
Yeah.
now he's like, okay, I'll get comfortable for that for $85.
There's a lot of things that would go into play with that. His position at work, love for Ruby. Yeah, I'd love to delve into that. That's a big psychological whoa, because there is a lot that you can read into that. But that's amazing. Well, thank you so much, Megan. You've just been so enlightening. I just love your input. You're just a beautiful person to talk to, and
Thank you.
just remind everyone that this Friday, Dateline, they're going to be having Lori. And I love what you said. Oh, what's the quote that, the person that represents themselves is the fool. They've got the fool for a client. The fact that she, like Lauren pointed out, she's already in jail for life.
Right.
There's no win here. So why not represent yourself? Why not go on Dateline with Keith Morrison? What else have I got to do all day long?
Well, she's very strategically using this opportunity to get her supply, which is to get attention and fame. And I'm sure that her little little brain is just going wild with fantasies of who's watching and how many are watching. And she made some comment to a fellow inmate when she was in jail in Rexburg that the pandemic was going on, but she was the biggest story. You know, that's all she cares about is how much fame and attention she's getting. And she knows this is her last chance because she knows she's going to go back to Idaho and serve her consecutive life sentences and never see the light of day again and fade into nothingness. So this trial is the opportunity for her to represent herself, to show everyone how smart she is, how talented, how beautiful. And yes, if Keith Morrison is knocking on your door, it's like, yeah, I'm going to complain about court TV having cameras in the courtroom, but I'm going to accept an interview with Keith Morrison.
You know? Please put me on Dateline. Yeah. I love
Right.
it. I love it. Well,
she only wants the attention when she can control the narrative. That's, I think, part of the problem.
You know, you don't want to put someone down for their spiritual beliefs, but I watched her, and I shouldn't say this, I'm not a psychologist in any way, but when I hear people using, because when I watched John's interview with Michelle Stone, and I heard a lot of the same things that Lori and Ruby both, well, God told me that I should do this. Well, I prayed and the answer was I should do this. To me, you are one step away from doing something really horrific, because when that little clip that we showed earlier, when she says, well, I know I'm going to be exonerated because I saw it. Jesus showed me, you know, and I'm like, okay, bless you for your faith. I guess that brings you peace or whatever. And you can't judge other crazy people's faith, but still there's a little bit of brain stuff going on, you know, to enable that.
It's so confusing, you know, to be a Mormon and to believe that you can get personal revelation from God. And the one question that the general authorities have consistently not answered over the years, although there probably have been many, 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 but the one that we can never nail them down on is it my own voice or is it God's voice talking to me? And even the apostles can't really explain that to you. And the problem is when you have someone who's mentally ill, what God tells them is going to be warped because their brain is warped, right? If you have someone who's mentally healthy, they're able to see and they're able to take what they believe is revelation from God and compare it to what God has done in the past and say, does this check out? You know, or is this off the rails? And they're able to have a little bit of introspection about that. But mentally ill people aren't able to do that. They're not able to compare it to a standard and say, okay, maybe this really isn't God telling me that. I've been the victim of that too, like thinking that God had revealed something to me that was not really in line with what the church teachings are. But I was like, but I got that feeling and I got that impression. And I really feel like it was God telling me that. It can be really confusing. And those of us who are, you know, mentally healthy or at least sane on some level are going to just kind of tuck that away as a data point and come back to it when we have something else to compare it to, rather than immediately acting on something that is really wild and outlandish. Yeah. So that's why the whole belief that you can talk to God and receive revelation from him is a really harmful one, because it's one that is so easy to, forgive the word, distort into something that ends up harming other people in really, really horrific ways.
Yeah. I mean, you've got, you know, a woman drowning her children because she heard voices. You've got a Zodiac killer killing people because he heard voices. And so, you know, when they're not LDS and they don't have that prophetic statement coming out, that they can use that voices thing. Well, in the secular world, people go, you're crazy. You're hearing voices. You might have schizophrenia.
Right. Is it God or is it schizophrenia? Right.
Yeah, that's okay. But in the church, they accept that as, well, she's really sweet, you know, and she prayed about it. And this was, you know, the answer to her prayers. And the other thing, because we don't have a checks and balance system, because we have the way the hierarchy is set up in the church, you could also have men with mental issues that are now in charge. And we don't have the system to take them out, which was probably my number one reason for resigning my membership, is because when you start reading the biographies of these prophets and you see how damaging messages were being told, and they didn't have a way of getting rid of those men, they just like Joseph Smith sent them on missions to try to quiet them. And, you know, that frightened me. And I thought, that's a very scary system. And I see now how this works. And so I'm out of here. I want to say I love Thrive. Thrive was a wonderful experience. We got a lot of really good messages from really strong, brilliant women. I've been to quite a few Thrives. They're all not that great. I found this one exceptional. And I really do think it's because of the speakers that were there. They were just phenomenal. And there wasn't a lot of filler. Sometimes you'll go to some of these meetings and there's a lot of filler with music or meditations. And I'm like, I don't want to do that. I just want to hear Artie talk, because it was amazing. And I love learning, and I would love to hear you. I would love to hear you at a Thrive sometime. That would be fascinating. But
yeah, I've been talking with Wayne Hepworth about that, and I would love to do it as well. It was my first Thrive. I've never been to one before, and it was a great one for my first one. But I think what I loved about it more than anything else was that I really did feel like it was a safe space for every person to be living their life the way that they're living it, without shame and without judgment. And I don't think there are enough spaces like that in the world. So for that reason, I was really grateful. And I think no matter who the speakers are, it's going to be that kind of space. But also the speakers were phenomenal.
And I also want to point out, you mentioned on one of your last podcasts, you mentioned a program for that set up. It was the system where people that are disabled that have been murdered by their parents or neglected to death by their parents. And what was that organization called?
So it's called Disability Day of Mourning.
Okay.
And it's I don't know if there's an organization. It's disability-memorial.org. And it is remembering people with disabilities murdered by their families. And so you can go to the index and you can look up people by their name or by their family relationship, by their location, and you can find the names and the stories of people who are disabled, who are murdered by their family members. And the point behind it is that a lot of times when people who are disabled experience violence at the hands of their caregivers, it's really marginalized and not talked about enough. And what I found, and the reason why I found this in the first place, is because one of my channel members pointed out that a lot of people like JJ, who was autistic, if they're victims, there's some victim blaming that goes into it by saying, what a burden they are on their caregiver or how they misbehave, and that's difficult to deal with. And so it's more an idea of ending the victim blaming, honoring the fact that many disabled people are abused and harmed and killed at the hands of their caregivers. And we need to be more aware that that is taking place.
Yeah, I appreciated you highlighting that. I had never heard that before, but as the mother of a severely disabled child for 37 years, the stress, the amount of time and effort, like you were saying, he was the youngest of our 6 kids. So I've got 5 other siblings, but your eating, your sleeping, your food, all is second to taking care of somebody with a disability. And now I have grandchildren that, have disabilities, and I see what their mothers and fathers are going through. But I love that you pointed out there's almost like I know because there was a case I think it was in Oregon, where a mother went hiking with her son and pushed him over a bridge. And he had autism, and there was a feeling like, but look what she had to do. Look what she had to do. And so the idea of victim blaming the disabled was, and you see the stories. I mean, our son, I barely would let him out of our sight because I was so fearful of abuse. He was blind, he was nonverbal, had no way of telling us what was going on. And that frightened me to death that there would be, So I found the wonderful school system that he went to. I applaud them. I trusted those people. You've got to have trust in the people that are caregiving. And I'm going to look into that organization because I do think there needs to be not only more memory of that, of the people that have suffered through that, but also I want to keep putting out a call for members of the church. I call them people in the foyer, because people that have children with disabilities, they live in the foyer. Because they're not welcome into Relief Society. They're not welcome into young men's or young women's. They're not cooperating. They're not the standard.
They're not reverent. They're not quiet.
They're not quiet, and they're disruptive. And so could you just go out to the hall? I want to do a whole episode. But unfortunately, there's a lot of really wonderful people out in the foyer that they're just doing what they think they should be doing. And I was there. I didn't, I did blame it on my bishop a few times, but I was like, did you not hear that thing they talked about getting a helper at church? That thing that was put in the handbook, did that just go past you?
Let me just say, just because we were talking about self-care earlier, and it's a tricky thing when you're caring for a disabled relative. Yeah. It's a tricky thing when you're caring for aging parents. It's an even trickier thing when you have both going on at the same time. Yeah. And so self-care looks a lot different in that circumstance, because you do have someone who's dependent on you for absolutely everything. So I will just say the moments of self-care may be smaller, they may be fewer and farther between, but they're just as important. And those, 5 or 10 minutes that you take for yourself, for breathing, for meditating, those are so, so important. And they can be as fulfilling as longer periods of time if you'll really allow yourself to have that 5-minute escape. And I didn't realize that I was doing self-care when I was a younger mom, but I used to keep a box of Cocoa Krispies in my closet. And, if I was having a rough day, I would escape for 5 minutes and go eat a bowl of Cocoa Krispies alone in my closet with the door closed. And my kids would be like, Mom, where are you? Where are you? I'd be like, you'll be fine for 5 minutes. I'm eating my Cocoa Krispies.
It could have been wine coolers. So I'm glad.
It could have been. Yeah, I'm glad it wasn't wine coolers or something stronger at the time. It was just Cocoa Krispies.
You know what? And thank you for saying that, because right now, and we're going to end on a political note, but right now there is a threat to the services that are offered in public schools, the resource services that are offered to those with disabled. And many of my kids had IEPs. Like I said, I got a whole house full of ADHD people, including me. So I had IEPs, fabulous speech therapists, but the people that worked with my son were lifesavers, because the short bus picked him up at 7:30 in the morning and took him over to the public school. And I knew I had from 7:30 in the morning to 3:30 to work out, go out to lunch with girlfriends, go to a movie, go whatever. I had those, and I was on the clock, but that was my sanity. That's what kept me going, because the minute he got back off that bus, he was all mine again. To take that away from these families that have kids with disabilities is the biggest crime. If I had to focus on something right now that's politically in the system, it's like, we cannot take that away, and we cannot make charter schools the answer. So,
don't get me started on education.
I know.
Yeah, there's so much we could talk about. I think the answer is that you need to come on my podcast. I'd love to have you tell your story on my podcast, and we'll just have to keep collaborating.
I think you're absolutely right. More women's voices. We need to be out there.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you again. And we will be collaborating on a lot more. And I'll be watching with you on Friday.
Thank you. It's good to know I'll have people out there with me.
Maybe I'll call you. We'll text.
Yeah.
All right. Bye-bye. See you later.
All right.
Oh my gosh. Well, once again, great, right? I mean, absolutely amazing. She is absolutely brilliant. For me, I need to surround myself with people that are calm, that have just a nature to them, because that's not my personality. And it's calming for me to have someone that I can converse with that has a calmer mind, a calmer mindset, and really, really has skills and tools that they can share. That's what I need in my life. And Megan is definitely one of those. So once again, I wanted to let you know what we talked about today was on Hulu. You can find Devil in the Family, The Fall of Ruby Franke. It's about 3 hours. It could be triggering for some. I didn't find it triggering, because I just was fascinated by the showing of the other side of her that Megan talked about with Lori, that there is usually two sides to all of us, right? But it showed that, and it was alarming. I wanted to show you this little clip. This is her husband, Kevin. It's going to be hard, because we're getting little clips on the news. We're not living with this family.
Other people.
I think there's a lot of things said there by Kevin that could be related to living in an indoctrinated, high demand fundamental religion, where you are told and you flip that switch and you stop listening to your gut. You stop listening to your own critical thinking thoughts that are telling you something's off here. I don't know if that's the right thing to do, but you keep listening to the authority and you go, well, I'm not a doctor, so what do I know? I'm not a therapist, so what do I know? And you turn that off and you just become obedient. And I love that he pointed out that, in the very beginning, I would have said, take a hike. But after being indoctrinated, looking at my son who trusted her, and also the church, the Mormon church trusted her enough to turn clients over to her, how much more validation do you need? If nothing else comes out of the She Became Visible podcasts in the past and in the future, this is what I am telling women. You need to start listening to your gut. You need to start listening to your own critical thinking. It's okay to question. It's okay to research. It's okay to read and study on your own and come to your own decisions. You cannot let others make decisions for you. from information that serves their purpose only. It's a very complicated situation, but Lori has her trial coming up, so that's going to be in the news a lot. This Hulu thing that's coming up, it's going to be bringing up this whole Ruby Franke thing a lot, and there's going to be more. There's going to be more that's coming out. So I really want you to all look at this and glean some possibly self-reflection from what you're hearing from these victims, and question whether maybe that's what I was doing. Maybe I should question what that doctor said. Maybe what that therapist said doesn't really apply to my child. I'm not going to follow that recommendation. So that's my encouragement for you this week. So I hope that this wasn't a triggering episode for you. I hope it was a learning episode for you. Please like and subscribe. I know you get tired of hearing that, but I am telling you, that is the way we get the information out there. And the more of you that share this, the more this information will get out, and hopefully we will perhaps even save some lives of some women that are in an abusive situation, children that are in an abusive situation, husbands that are in abusive situations. It's not unheard of for that to be the truth, okay? So thanks for joining me today on She Became Visible, and we will see you again next week. Bye-bye.